Do you want to change the world? Be on the cover of Time magazine or the proverbial Wheaties box? A lot of us have huge aspirations, and I think there are a lot of people out there that spend a lot of time reading self-help books. I know I spend a ton of time reading them. That's, I don't know, just something I love doing. And there are so many things out there to learn and so many great ways to go about it. But what are the best books out there? And there are a ton of great books. And is there one set that you could say, take these books and it's going to work for everybody? Absolutely not. I do not believe that at all. Is there a set of books that are going to be, better curated for certain populations? Absolutely. What we're looking at today is what are a good collection of overall books that can give you an idea of what is going to happen if you approach it in a certain way. So how can you predictably reach success? And we got 5 books that we're going to go over. But for this to happen, you really have to have your brain in a certain state. And I'm not saying you got to go meditate before you read or journal before you read or all those things are helpful, but you don't have to do those things. What I'm talking about is what Carol Dweck called either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. We have to have the growth mindset. The fixed mindset are those people who think that the world is the way it is and our brains are stuck the way that they are. We cannot change. We have our personality that's not ever going away. People with the growth mindset say, here's where I am right now, and I have the ability to change that. Those are the people who are more likely to read the self-help books. Those are the people who are more likely to be on this, right? So you've got to have your brain set up in that way. But what we have to do is have functional connection between the different areas of our brain. It doesn't matter what our mindset is if we don't have that functional connectivity. If you don't have the functional connectivity in a certain area, you're not going to be able to use the psychology the way that it was designed to anyway, right? And you got to remember that the psychological piece of the brain is the last one to develop. We start with the sensory system, and primitive reflexes develop sensory system, and then you start developing that intelligence, upper level behavior, all of that as we go. So when you look at the prefrontal cortex, around 25 to 40 years old, depending on the research. There's some new research coming out that says that the brain may continue to develop until around 40 years. It's not well accepted right now, but at least 25 years old before you have all of this development there. So it's something that we actually have to have that change. So how do we go about this? The thing that I am going to tell you that is significantly different than anybody else out there is going to tell you is that we need to focus on our weaknesses. The brain is neuroplastic. If we can target those weaknesses with stimulation, we can get to them to develop and grow. If we can get them to develop and grow, we increase that connectivity between the areas, you increase the functionality, and you have new skills. That is part of the growth mindset, is targeting your weaknesses, and that goes against everything that is in the self-help books. All the self-help books say focus on your strengths, focus on your strengths, focus on your strengths, right? In this case, we need to develop our weaknesses. So let's go ahead and give you an analogy of what that looks like. So if you look at a computer, you've got the hardware. As long as everything is in there that you need, you can turn on the computer, right? When you get a computer, it has an operating system on it. That's the primitive software that we're born with. That's like being born with primitive reflexes. The primitive reflexes help us find food. They help us move around a little bit. They help develop that sensory motor system up a little higher through just primitive movements. They're not voluntary movements necessarily. They're not task oriented. We can't really say, they're not fine tuned to what we want to do, but they help us move and develop. When we get that computer with the software that we need, that's when we can really type in a prompt and have it do what we want, right? That's really the way that the brain develops. We have the hardware when we're born. We have to develop it to some extent, but we start putting on that primitive reflex or the primitive software, and then we have to upgrade it at regular intervals. So let's go ahead and dive into the books. And the first book is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I don't like putting best-selling novels on these books and best-selling books on these lists because they're books that most people have read. But what Sinek talks about in this book is you can't just take an idea and make it a reality. You can't say, I want to do this, if you don't have that deep understanding of why you want to do it. You've got to start with the why. You've got to figure out exactly what you want to do. And if you could sit down with a pen and paper and write down exactly what you want to do in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's going to have a huge benefit to you. And the reason for this, you start using that right brain. That's where you start getting a little bit creative. You start, looking at divergent possibilities. So instead of convergent, we're getting finer and finer, more and more focused. We start looking at the divergent, the things that we can do. And this is where a lot of the world-changing technology comes from. They see this is capable of doing this, but they see those other possibilities and they're able to branch it out and connect those different areas. And starting with why is a good thing. There are very, very few people in the world that know what they want. If you ask somebody what their goals are, a lot of people say, I don't want to work 40 hours a week. I don't want to have to worry about money. They list all the things that they do not want. They do not know the things that they do want. And they might be able to tell you why they do not want those things, but we've got to know what we want. If we know what we want, if we have that point on the map, we have a little bit better way of getting there. So, number 2. 10x is easier than 2x. This is a book that is coming out, I believe, in May. I got an advanced copy of this, and it's a phenomenal book. Really, really book. And a really, really good book. And I don't agree with the philosophy on this. When we look at, Grant Cardone's 10x, I don't think that's a good fit for most people. If we look at David Goggins, just keep pushing yourself and keep pushing yourself. You're capable of more than you realize. That's a good fit for some things in life. But I don't think it's a good long-term strategy. Is this something that you can make work? Absolutely. I think people that don't have families can probably make it work okay. But if you have a family and one of your goals is to keep your family healthy, just going 10x and pushing yourself to death is probably not a good solution. So I was very hesitant to read this. But Hardy really, he really convinced me on this. By looking at 10 times bigger goals, we don't have as many options on how to get there. So we have to narrow our focus on those few things that could get us there. If we're just trying to double things, we have a ton of options. Like there are a lot of things that you could do to change this. You could increase your sales. You could, fix your marketing. You could work harder. There's a ton of different ways that you could do it, but you have too many options. You can't narrow down your focus. So really good book. And what this really does is it narrows our focus. So while Simon Sinek's book opens up our right brain and allows us that divergent thinking, 10x is easier than 2x brings us down into those focused few things that are really going to lead us to that next level. Next book we're going to go over is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. The Compound Effect is a book that it came out a long time ago. I read it probably 20 years ago, and it's very simple in everything that it talks about. What it really amounts to is if you make small choices that are going to be in the direction that you want them to be. So, small choices either bad or small choices good can compound and they have bigger effects. And the big example of this is the doubling penny. If somebody were to offer you a penny that doubles every single day for the next month, or they were offering you $1 million, what would you choose? Most people look at it and they're like, $1 million is going to be way more than that doubling penny. But that penny that you start with 1 cent the first day and you go 2 cents and 4 cents and 8 and 16 and 32 and 64 and you just start doubling that penny until like the 27th day or something like you're behind what the $1 million would be. But on that 28th day, you're at like 1.3 million and then 2.6 and it starts to snowball pretty quickly. So the small actions that we take in life, done repetitively, are what makes the big difference. And that's really what Hardy talks about in this book. Psychology is more, or that's the wrong note there. That's really the thing I want you to take from it. What I was going to go on to here is the gap versus the gain. And this is another Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan book. And another thing I don't like about any kind of book lists are, why are they listing 5 books from the same author? Are those the only books that they've read? Do they have a vested interest in it? I think Ben Hardy has some really, really good stuff. He's got a lot of the psychological tools that you will need. And the thing that I like about a lot of this is when you look at psychology in general, they talk about it from 2 perspectives, either approach or avoidance. And we talked about the avoidance. Most people know what they don't want. I don't want to work 40 hours. What are you going to do to make that happen? That's an avoidance goal. An approach goal was, I want a really nice house. I'm going to work until I have the money to do that. That's approach. And the difference between these two people is people who are approach minded are more likely to be reward minded. So they can give themselves some sort of reward, or say, I'm going to give myself this benefit if I hit this goal. And they're very good at that. Whereas people who are a little more avoidance based just don't do it quite as well with that type of reward. So knowing what kind of motivation you have is important for this. But in the gap versus the gain, what Hardy and Sullivan talk about is, do you view yourself in the gap or do you view yourself in the gain? And what they define as the gap is how far you are right now from where you want to be. What they define as the gain is how far you are now from where you started. And there's a big difference in this, because if we look at where we're at now and where we want to go, we're never going to be happy in that, right? We've always got a gap there. And as soon as you start getting better, you're going to bump that thing out further and further. You're going to keep taking it, longer and longer distances, and you'll never reach it. You're never going to be happy. You're never going to enjoy that. Whereas if we look at the gain and we start, saying, I started over here and I'm already right here, that's huge progress. You get positive feedback on that. You get excited about how far you've come. And you can it's okay to look at both of them, but celebrating the gain versus always looking at the gap. And this is something I've been terrible at my entire life. I've always looked at that gap. And it's something I'm working to change. Is it something that has really driven me? Absolutely. But have I taken any time to enjoy it? No. And that's the big thing about this, is when we have left brain drive, when we have that approach type of mentality to things, we have better drive, we have better motivation, we have that hunger that everybody speaks about, and we're just going after something that we want. We're not just sitting there and saying, man, this sucks, because I've done that many, many times, and it's not a whole lot of fun. But this also gives you a pretty good idea. How are you going to stress? What is going to happen when you stress? Are you going to start looking at that and stop? That's the thing that obviously isn't going to help you. So moving on, last book we're going to look at is Raise Your Healthy Deserve Level by Gary Cady. And Gary Cady he's a dental consultant. So, it's just kind of a random book that I came across. But what he is talking about is what he has seen in his consulting practice is people end up having a big victory, and then they end up messing it up. They start moving forward, they start getting busier, they start making more money, and they just self-sabotage to where they're right back to where they were. They're not making any more money. They're constantly stuck. Their thermostat is set at a certain level, and they can't get that higher. And what he wants us to do is set that thermostat a little higher. And how do you do that? You feel like you deserve things. And there are a lot of different books we could look at this. Peaks and Valleys is a great book, but we've got to change the approach to things. When we get into those things, we have to have, any type of success starts to snowball. Any type of lack of success starts to snowball, right? Frustration and all of that stuff, they start to snowball as well. We've got to design our environment to actually encourage that snowball to move in the right direction. And then if you combine the gap and the gain, if you're looking at that gain and you're looking at the healthy deserve level, together, it's huge. And that's the thing I want you to look at on all of these books is, are there better books on habit formation? Absolutely. I think that, like Atomic Habits, things like that would probably be better than the compound effect. But the compound effect gives you that realization that all of it has a bigger outcome. So there are a ton of books that we could do. We have to change the outcome. And that's why I chose these 5 books and put them together. Because when we look at this collectively, they're the things that are going to help move you together. But we have to look at them collectively. We can't just look at start with why and raise your healthy deserve level. Because if we sit there and we just think about, what we have and, why we deserve more, it's not ever going to happen. You have to put the compound effect into action with that. You have to put in the 10x is easier than 2x mentality. And we bring in that left brain and that right brain, and we balance the two out. We connect the two together. That's where you're going to see success. It's not going to be from one book. It's not going to be from one type of book. It's not going to be from one author. We have to get multiple perspectives for this. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, subscribe. There is a a brain balanced hemispheric checklist over there. If you want to find if you're more likely to have that right brain divergent thinking or that left brain convergent thinking, it's a free tool. Just download it, take the test. Help yourself understand your brain better. And if you can understand your brain better, you're going to have better outputs.